Are the US and Chinese economies really about to start decoupling? I saw this article and it was a part of a series of articles that have now come out that are making it clear that something is going on negative in the US China relationships as it pertains to the economy. And that something is not just a temporary like during the Trump administrations, it was seen more as political, a little tit for tat, but then that they would back away from it over time and things would restore to normal. But now, with the Biden administration's extraordinary moves on the global stage, economists and others around the world are clear that what is looming is a full-scale trade war. And beyond a trade war, what's really looming is a breaking down of the global economic system, in which we will have a bipolar system where you will have the United States and the Western countries in economic relations with other close nations. And then on the other side, you'll have China and Russia and the BRICS nations in close collaboration on their economies along with their partners. And such a world essentially is not good for anyone because it will drive prices up, it will drive efficiencies down, and now all of a sudden economists who were once cheering, let's get China, let's tariff China, let's, even politicians who are, and some still are doing it, but the majority of people are looking at this and saying, wait a minute. There could be risk here for everyone. Looming U.S.-China trade war bodes ill for green tech. It's going to affect every sector. It's already affecting the technology sector. It's going to affect the automaker sector. It's going to affect the manufactured goods sector, not just here in America, not just in the West, but around the world. This decoupling that is taking place should be a cause for alarm for all of us, because the goods that we purchase, many of them are not really made by one company or one country in particular. They're made by companies that are spread out throughout the world, and through this global supply chain, you may have a piece of the technology made here, a piece there, and then assembled in a third country. And so this decoupling is going to disrupt the supply chain, but it's also going to disrupt the economies of the of local economies that are depending upon smooth supply chains as well as low prices in order for them to thrive and for there to be economic growth. But more than that, this is seen as an attack, and I think it's a one-way attack against the West, but China has been placed in a position where they must respond. Look at this, U.S.-China relations. Xi tells Blinken, America cannot say one thing and do another. Chinese President Xi Jinping urges the U.S. to view China's development positively so bilateral relations could be stabilized. Ultimately, the West is alarmed that a country that is not aligned in its sphere of influence is succeeding on the global stage. And so they are employing tactics to undermine and sabotage those companies that are successful. I saw this, when I looked at the TikTok ban, when I looked at some of the other tariffs and things. Essentially, it's not that China has done anything wrong. It's that China has done something right. And by doing something right, it threatens U.S. hegemony across the world. Their place as the global leader in economics is what put them in place to be the global leader militarily. And it's that threat that they are trying to address by undermining the Chinese economy, by undermining the ability of China to take care of its citizens and to provide a higher quality of life. But what they failed to realize and what they did not calculate is often some of our Western leaders, this Davos crowd, as I call them, they're so insular about making money and protecting their position. They very rarely employ long-term strategies where they consider the responses for their actions. Let me give you 3 examples of how China is responding to U.S. economic attacks. And China is well capable, and we saw this in Ukraine. They assumed that they could bully Russia and assumed that they could use financial pressures and other types of tactics to cripple Russia's economy. And in the end, their lack of strategic focus, their lack of understanding, undermine the entire effort. Well, the same thing can be said for what's going on between the U.S. and really it's the West and China. The first response to this pressure tactics, these attacks against the economy of China, is economic performance. You know, when I was growing up, I realized that the one way to make your adversaries, to make your haters, to make the people who wish you bad to really suffer is by making them watch you do good. You see, that's the key, because that's where this is all about. This is not because China has underperformed their threat. It's because they have overperformed Western box that they have created for the Chinese government. You can go only so far before now you become a threat, and we will begin to build military bases around your borders. We'll begin to tariff and try to cut you off from the economic systems. We'll begin to try to decouple and put export bans. You can only go so far. And the way you shame those who are your adversaries is through success. They say things about you, but you can prove them wrong by just pushing forward and achieving far beyond what they assumed that you could. And that's what China has done. China has gotten the trade war it deserves. This is just one of the articles that they're saying. The Biden administration's steep new tariffs are a rationale response to Xi Jinping's aggressive economic policies. Listen to this. These are a response to another country succeeding. The trade war is a response to China taking care of its people and expanding. I thought that's what countries were supposed to do. This is new to me, that if you succeed, then all of a sudden you're a threat and that you're asking for a trade war. Look at this. Made in China 2025. A threat to global trade. I thought that when a country brought products to the market and those products were of a quality and a price that they had purchasers, those who wanted to buy them, that would be a good thing. But what they're saying is it's only a good thing depending on who's bringing the products to the market, and it's only a good thing if they have an opportunity to bring substandard or overpriced products to the same market and be able to compete with the inferior product or an overpriced product. That's essentially what this whole argument is about. It's not about lack of quality or lack of or the pricing, because if your product is poor quality or overpriced, nobody's going to buy it. That's not a threat to anybody. That's a threat to you. You'll be in bankruptcy very shortly. But the problem is the product is good and the price is better. And the Western countries are not in a position to compete. And so they've got to change the narrative. Look, Made in China 2025 was a strategic plan that China went into to move their economy away from so much dependent upon real estate and to double down on manufacturing, high-tech manufacturing. And this is what they're afraid of. China's industrial policy is aimed at rapidly expanding its high-tech sectors and developing its advanced manufacturing base. But President Trump and other leaders of industrial democracies see the plan as a threat. Listen, Plan 2025 was a 10-year plan. It started back in 2015. Why didn't the West create their own Plan 2025? Why didn't they decide that they wanted to create better economies for their people and go through the process of developing their economies in these same and let the best man win? That's how I thought capitalism worked, but we see more and more that capitalism is rigged. It's like a Monopoly game where when the losing side doesn't like the game, if it's the West, they change the rules. And then when all else fails, they turn over the board and declare war. That's essentially what we're seeing with the Western countries when it comes to China. World's biggest manufacturing economies. When you look at this gross production, China. When you look at this value added, China. This is what they're afraid of. They were asleep at the wheel. They showed no leadership. They showed no foresight. They complained that if they had done a plan 2025 in every Western country, cut out the shenanigans and all of the debates about useless issues and all of the driving people to the polls to vote about, just ridiculous stuff. Let's vote about something real. Let's vote about, is there a vision for the countries? Is there something of substance that we can buy into that's going to make us competitive for the future? That's not what any of the conversations were about. They were about who gets to use which bathroom. That's what the West is debating about, bathroom wars. They're debating, and I'm not against LGBTQ. I'm not for LGBTQ. I don't have a position on it. My position is this, that the leadership focuses far too much on these strategic wedge issues. And by non-strategic, I mean these are issues that are not focused on our position in the global economy, the people's well-being economically, emotionally, their retirement, their education for their children. We spend too much time in the West focused on these foolish wedge issues and not enough time picking leaders based upon their vision for the countries for the future. And this is why we find ourselves constantly behind or constantly trying to play catch up more and more. Yes, we started the race out ahead, but we're seeing countries all around the world catching up to the Western bloc in development, in GDP as it pertains to purchasing power parity, and we see decoupling. We see all of these things happening, and still the leaders have no solutions for how to become competitive. They have solutions for how to try to stifle the opposition, but not solutions for how to become competitive. China's automakers take the world by storm with electric vehicle push. They are dominating the EV market. And that's one of the things that has caused the Western leadership to be startled. Because by the time they woke up and said, hey, we've been arguing over bathrooms, we've been arguing over this nonsense issue and that nonsense issue, we've been fighting in the streets and protesting about this nonsense thing and using it as a wedge issue. By the time they finally woke up, they say, wait a minute, we're behind by a whole generation in the green technology. We've talked about green tech. We've talked about where the world is going, but now we find ourselves by diverting our attention, squandering the tax base and the resources. Now we don't have the resources, nor do we have the time to play catch up. How China's car companies built so wide a lead in the race to make EVs. How is this possible? It's possible because of a lack of vision and a lack of leadership. And the punishments that the West is trying to put on China is because China did what they needed to do to excel. Just a brief note, if you can, I'd love for you guys to join the members only access pass beyond the headlines. It's our membership system so that we can grow the channel. If 1% of all of our viewers were able to join access pass, we could move the program from twice a week to 3 to 4 and then to 5 times a week, which is our ultimate goal, is to do a daily broadcast. So if you could consider joining access pass, it's $2 a month, and it would support the program, support the channel immensely. China using industrial robots at 12 times U.S. rate. Chinese Communist Party has made robot adoption in manufacturing a top policy priority while market-driven U.S. lags woefully behind. Essentially, they came in and saw the future and said, how do we galvanize our resources and move us towards that future? That's the way to respond to those who want to hold you back. The way to respond is to continue to innovate, continue to succeed, continue to press the envelope, and to close the gap in some areas, but to leave the opposition behind in others. And that's what China has done. Rise of industrial robots. When you look at it, U.S. raises overcapacity concerns in economic talks with China. Overcapacity means you can't compete. That's all overcapacity means. Because if you actually overproduce, then you'll have products that nobody wants to buy. If you actually are truly doing overcapacity, then you will have warehouses full with stuff that is either subpar or overpriced. But now, if you're producing large quantities of items that people want to buy, then that means the person who has overcapacity is the one who's producing products that they can't sell. The overcapacity is not in China. The overcapacity is actually in the West. Because if you're producing electric trucks at $100,000 USD and trying to export those and sell them around the world, yes, there'll be an initial surge and the purchase of them. But what happens when you get past that initial group of people who are willing to shell out that kind of cash on a vehicle? You run out of customers rather quickly. And so the overcapacity really isn't in China. The overcapacity is with the substandard and overpriced products that are being made in the West. Almost half of industrial robots are in China. That's a lead. That's half, not just half, that's half in the world. Half of all of the industrial robots in the world are in China. That's an amazing feat. That lets you know that they are prepared for business. This Plan 25 did exactly what they wanted to do. They focused on technology. They focused on the areas of expansion in manufacturing and high-tech manufacturing, and they're ready for competition. They're going to meet these attacks with productivity and success. China's semiconductor industry advances despite U.S. export controls. So the United States is putting all of these export bans, but all they're doing is forcing China to get into greater technological advancement and research to make up a market within China that did not exist before the export bans. So in the long run, the export bans not only didn't slow down China significantly, but it also created an artificial market from which now the Western chip makers will now have competition on the global stage. In chip race, China gives Huawei the steering wheel. Huawei's new smartphone and the future of semiconductor exports controls. Janet Yellen was correct that some of these nonsense sanctions, export bans, if they're overused, if they're used improperly for the wrong purposes, they will do more harm than good. One, they become useless because countries find ways to get around them. Two, you create artificial markets in the short run that then become true competitors for Western products in the long run. China to give chip makers $27 billion to counter U.S. sanctions. Big Fund 3 will have further funding rounds. So essentially all you're doing is getting them to invest in a place where the West had dominance. And the dominance could have been maintained at a profit for these companies for decades to come. But now that you've intervened, it's just nonsensical. I don't know what the Western leaders are thinking. Huawei, SMIC used U.S. tech to make advanced chips, Bloomberg reports. So not only did they circumvent in the short run, which is why the sanctions didn't have the effect that they thought it would. The export bans did not have the effect that they thought it would. In the long run, they are developing internal, 100% internally sourced and produced products. And when that happens, now you've got a global competitor who is able to grow in a market that was created by export bans by the doing of the leadership in the West. That's the problem with all of these tactics, is the unintended consequences long term means that you don't excel, you actually go backwards in your attempt to grow your economy, because it's artificial growth. It's not growth through competition. It's growth through manipulation and growth through trying to rig the system. And over the years, we've seen when these type of blows were dealt to large economies, not only did they adapt, but they thrived in the long run. China's SMIC could produce 5 nanometer chips despite trade restrictions. So ultimately, none of this existed before. This is a making, essentially, we forced them to innovate. We've given them the catalyst to grow and to compete in a sector where the West dominated. That can't make sense. So I think the best way that China is showing that it has the muscle is by continuing to perform. The second way that China is responding to these attacks, to these economic threats that the West is throwing its way to slow it down as it begins to lap many of the Western countries and really is giving the United States a run for its money, is through de-dollarization, is the decoupling from the economic system. The U.S. is eyeing sanctions that could cut off some Chinese banks from the rest of the world. Now, they're trying to sanction these banks, and it's cockamamie. This is one thing I do give the Biden administration and the Trump I give the Obama administration and the Trump administration great credit for, is the fact that they realize that if you weaponize the financial system, all you're going to do is create a decoupling, and you're going to undermine the U.S. dollar, undermine the U.S. financial hegemony. This exorbitant privilege of being the reserve currency will be undermined because you're using the currency and financial system to achieve aims that should be achieved through negotiation and through economic strategy and policy, not financial policy. And as a result, what we have is China wants to insulate itself against Western sanctions. We assess its progress in 6 critical technologies. This was a good article by The Economist. China has decided that, hey, if you want to play games with the currency system, if you want to manipulate the financial systems of the world, we will begin to work with partners like BRICS and Russia and India and South Africa. We'll begin to work with other partners to pull away from a system that is not fair. The financial system was not envisioned that it would be used as a political leverage over countries that have economic or other disagreements. Not the dollar, not the SWIFT system, but the extraordinary use of that system by the Biden administration is undermining long-term the financial stability, the financial position, the exorbitant privilege that the United States in particular has been afforded by being the world's reserve currency. China sells record sum of U.S. debt amid signs of diversification. China was the number one holder of U.S. debt. Foreign holder of U.S. debt. But here recently, what we've seen is if you want to go to war with China economically, why would they then hold U.S. debt? Why would they help fund a country that is trying to undermine them economically? Why would they use currency from a country who has declared themselves a hostile nation towards them? It doesn't make sense. To think otherwise is foolish. And not only that, when they see the Biden administration and the Western partners seize the reserves of Russia, what does that make any sound country think? If you were a sound country, if you were anybody, you don't have to be, if I was just a regular individual and I saw the bank take somebody else's money because of political or any other issue, breaking contracts and rules, I would pull my money out. I don't care what the rationale was for it. It doesn't make sense for me to leave my money in a place where it could be potentially hostile and is increasingly hostile towards me. That it doesn't make sense. Beijing offloaded a total of $53.3 billion of treasuries and agency bonds combined in the first quarter, according to calculations based on the latest data from the U.S. Department of the Treasury. Belgium, often seen as a custodian of China's holdings, disposed of $22 billion of treasuries during the period. Other words, hey, you want to decouple, then we want to put our money back in other places. Look at this. China's selling of Treasury and U.S. agency debt rises to record. Never before have we seen this. If you look at what was happening in the 2000s, it was constantly increasing. Agency as well as Treasury debts were constantly being sucked up. In the 2010s, there were periods of sell-off, but nothing like what happens when we get to 2015. When we get to 2015, we see more and more treasuries sold off. Look at the amount of blue. So yes, China is buying agency, but they're selling off treasuries at an enormous pace. And the agencies here recently in 2023, 2024, those have dropped in flatline. So that all that you see is mainly sell-offs. In other periods, there were purchases and sales. But in this period, you see a nonstop, just constant sell-off. And really from 2015 on to 2024, if you look at the center of the graph, what you see at the top is mostly blue, and what you see at the bottom is mostly gray. That means the attack was on the federal government. The attack was on treasuries, not agencies, but on the treasuries. And so this is going to continue, this movement away from treasury bonds. Look at this, U.S. holdings of China's holdings of U.S. Treasury securities. You see the direction of this. When the 2015 hit and they began to complain about China and there was all of the tariffs, when all of this stuff started, you see now a consistent, constant trend of a move away from U.S. debt. As the trade war, the seeds of it started to emerge in 2015, but it started to grow and grow. And then under the Biden administration, it just took off. China has boosted gold holdings in official reserves. I don't know if you've looked at the gold prices lately, but they have been skyrocketing. I had got a little gold earlier on, I guess a couple years ago, bought a couple, and it wasn't doing much. It was kind of up and down. But then I looked the other day and gold prices are soaring. And a large part of that is because you have state players and state actors heavily diversifying away from the dollar and using other means for transactions and as a store of value for their country's reserves. And this is one of the things that not just China is doing, but China is coordinating this effort along with other partners in the BRICS countries and other partners around the world. This is how they are responding. You know, you don't always have to respond boisterously, but sometimes you can respond just by doing what you do and letting others talk about it. I want to take just a quick second to invite everyone to join our members only access pass to help the channel go from a couple times a week to we're trying to get up to daily. So if you could consider, it's $2 a month, and we would appreciate your consideration about joining Access Pass for exclusive videos, exclusive live links, as well as chats and polls. It's a lot of content that we'll be putting out for our members only section. De-risked. China's U.S. bond footprint fades. Essentially, what China is doing is pulling away from not just treasuries. They're also pulling away now from agency bonds. And this is going to have an immense impact in the U.S. government's ability to finance its out-of-control debt. One thing we do know about the United States is it currently is specializing in accumulating more debt at a rate that is staggering to think about. But if you're selling debt, you've got to have buyers. And one of the problems that we have in the West, especially in the United States, is who are those buyers going to be? When you look at the average household, the average household is not really in a position to assume some of this debt. And so there's going to be, not that it won't be bought, but at what price will you be able to sell? What will be the rates that will have to be offered in order to get purchasers to buy the debt, as well as who are those new purchasers? That all will have to be worked out as others pull away from the dollar and pull away from the debt markets in the West, in particular, the U.S. debt. The third way that China is responding to these economic attacks is through increasing their military strength. And say what you will, China's increase of military spending and military strength is far different than any other country in the world, partially because of their industrial capacity and their manufacturing capacity. It gives them a strategic advantage in the production of military hardware, at a price point that many in the West cannot compete with because of the limited industrial and production capacity. Look at the problems they're having in production in the West as it pertains to the Ukraine war. The inability to ramp up production of artillery shells and of infantry fighting vehicles and of other material, of howitzers and of guns and tanks and all of the rest. Well, China being a manufacturing powerhouse, when it decides that it wants to put its muscle behind a military expansion, it definitely has the wherewithal to do so. Why are we doing so little to counter China's military buildup? This is from the Heritage Foundation. Essentially, somebody has woken up and saw the handwriting on the wall. Not only are they building up their military, but they're doing it in a way that is building a military for the future. I saw this article, this report about how China was moving away from the building of extremely costly, large aircraft carriers. For the most part, they're still building some, but they're putting a high priority on drone ships. In essence, what they're realizing is that these humongous aircraft carriers may actually be obsolete in very little time, because the future of aerial combat, the future of these aerial missions may be dominated by unmanned aerial vehicles. And so they're not just developing, and this is one of the things, is that they're developing and innovating, and doing so bypassing some of the antiquated investments that were prevalent throughout the world. So it's like, okay, this technology was great for a season. Why should we invest in that when we can innovate, invest in the technology that will fuel the wars of the future, not the wars of the past? And so you see countries who invested early now trying to shift. They're trying to maintain these legacy items while also trying to invest in the future, where China is not maintaining the legacy items as much as they are dumping money into getting to where they need to go for the future. When I saw these images of the types of UAV boats that China is investing in, it is startling because the footprint is smaller, which means that the ability to manufacture faster is much greater. And for a country that has great manufacturing capacity, by having an investment in smaller, more mobile platforms, even if those platforms were destroyed in war, they could be more quickly replaced versus these huge aircraft carriers and huge other items that no matter how much manufacturing you have, they just take long to, because they're so huge, they just take a long time to produce. If you need fewer of those and you can produce more of these at scale, you're talking about a powerful Navy indeed. And here's some of the earlier renderings. And when the renderings came out, people laughed. They tried to, brush over the idea. But then when it comes to pass, now the world is alarmed at what China is doing, because China has made a leap in their doctrine in combat. And that's going to force the West, in particular the United States, to respond. China's fighter jet fleet is growing in size and appears to have made a big jump in capability, new Pentagon report shows. Well, it's not just in their Navy that they are deploying new technologies and new equipment, it's also in their Air Force and their ability to man domestically produce. That's the key. It's not that they have, it's not that that they're producing these, but these aircraft that they're producing, many of the new high-tech aircraft are 100% domestically produced. That is an astonishing feat. And when you can do that, there's no export ban, there's no restrictions, there's very little that the West can do to stop the military buildup that is occurring in China. And so essentially what China is saying is two things. One, we're going to progress. We are going to continue to excel in our economy. And we are going to continue to produce goods and services for the world. You can compete or you can go home. We are not going to slow down at all. The second thing they're saying is, if you want to use your financial system as a weapon against us, we'll pull out of it and we still will be able to sell and produce products and sell them to the world because there are enough partners who will be signed up for the BRICS currency and signed up for other currencies and trade mechanisms to where our products can still come to market. That's the second thing they're saying. And the third thing they're saying in the economic war is we are not a little country. We're not some country that you can just ride into with tanks and topple our government or topple our economy through the use of military force. You're not going to be able to just send in guns like they do in Africa and they've done throughout the colonial period and the neo-colonial period when any of these African countries stood up against for their own economic interests. The West began to fund and to funnel weaponry into opposition, starting chaos and confusion. You're not going to be able to do that to China. You're not going to roll up on the shores of China with aircraft carriers and landing vessels and topple the government through the use of the military. This isn't Iraq. This isn't Syria. This isn't Libya. That's essentially the message that China is sending. I don't think their military is as much about offense as it is about showing that defensively you will have to compete economically because that's the only thing you can do. Because the Chinese government is saying that they're going to stand firm and defend their territory and their people. And if you want to excel in the global economy, you're going to have to excel the old-fashioned way, not the Libya route, not the Syria route, not the Iraq route, not the wars of economic expansion. You're going to have to compete on a level playing field. China and the U.S. are numb to the real risk of war. I don't believe this article. I put it up here because I'm clear that I don't believe China wants a hot war. You don't need a war if you're winning. If you're closing the gap, if you're succeeding economically, what would be the purpose of engaging in a war? China has been very strategic. Matter of fact, what they've done is they've built up their military in order to prevent a war. They built up and positioned themselves not in order to launch a conflict, but in order to ensure that a war would not come to them. And as they continue to build it, I don't believe that they're going to engage in any provocation that would lead to a direct military confrontation with anyone. Not because they can't win, not because they, even in the future, if they could win. It's not about winning on the battlefield. It's about winning strategically. And their improvement of their economy is the only win that they need. America must optimize forces to avoid losing a war with China. Air Force Secretary says, listen, Biden and Xi agreed to increase military communications to avoid accidents. Essentially what we're seeing is this. It's not only a brinksmanship, but it's also exhausting. It's almost like what the United States did with the Soviet Union, where the pressures economically to keep up with the military expansion were too great for the Soviet Union. So they had to opt out of this tit-for-tat growth in military capacity because their economy was not strong enough to sustain it. Essentially, China is doing the same thing. They are expanding and forcing the United States to spend greater and greater resources to try to contain them while they're trying to contain Russia, while they're trying to contain Iran, while they're trying to be the global policeman. It is expending the resources. It's straining those resources exponentially. And so China is playing the long game. How long can you keep up being the world policeman when you're trying to police multiple countries that are quite large? You're trying to police areas and regions that are quite unstable. Can you keep pace? No, yes, the U.S. can keep pace if it was just China versus the U.S., but the U.S. taking the role as the global policeman means that it has to spread its resources out, not just in Ukraine, not just in the Middle East, not just throughout Africa, where they've got all these bases, all throughout the Asia Pacific. It is a terrible financial strain. That's why they're saying U.S. should avoid open armed conflict with China. Top U.S. general said. It's clear that, hey, the U.S. could win, but at what cost? The U.S. could succeed, but at what cost? And to be honest with you, the longer this economic expansion occurs in China, the greater and stronger their economies become. And essentially, the greater and stronger the military deterrent on the Chinese part will grow. And that's going to be a serious situation. And here's another angle to the military expansion that oftentimes we don't talk about. There's more than one way to skin a cat. The Chinese military expansion doesn't mean that China has to get into a direct confrontation with the West. They can merely drain the coffers of the West by funneling goods and services to countries who are in direct conflict, to countries who are an adversary of the United States and the West. Look what they're doing in Russia. D&I, Russia gaining ground in Ukraine with China's help. Boy, that's a win-win. If you want to sanction us, if you want to make us an enemy, then guess what? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so what China is doing is far more strategic than what the West envisioned when they started this trade war with China. We will sell dual purpose goods. It grows our economy and it diminishes the Western economy, because every tank that's blown up, every shell that's expended, Ukraine has to get that from somewhere. And so China is really, while the U.S. says they're using Ukraine to weaken Russia, China is using Russia to weaken the West. And it's working, because the West is showing they don't have the production capacity. Much of the aid, and I did a video about the Ukraine crisis. Go back and watch that, because there's a crisis in that the aid that is being provided is, poorly managed, poorly tracked, and is not consistent from the West as a result of their diminished production and manufacturing capacity. China helps Russia evade sanctions and likely most supplies tech used in Ukraine, U.S. report says. So there's lots of ways to respond. And oftentimes we look at the responses as they have to be symmetrical. You put tariffs on me, I have to put tariffs on you. You do export bans, I have to do export bans. No, China is going to respond in a way and in a manner that best meets their long-term goals. And they're responding by de-dollarizing, they're responding by excelling, and they're responding through their military buildup, as well as their use of military capacity and industrial capacity to support those who are adversaries of the United States and of the West. And in so doing, they create a deterrent. If the West was wise, they would get back to the negotiating table and try to figure out a way out of this, trade war, and to pull the China, not necessarily back into the Western sphere, but to make them more neutral as they were in the early 2000s and in the 90s. But now they've become really full speed ahead of defending themselves against what they perceive to be as an attack against their people, an attack against their economy, an attack against their livelihood, and they're not going to stand for it. I want to thank you for watching Money Matters Monologue. Stay tuned, because we do have the video coming up, and we like to end each program with an informative video from our video library. If you sign up for our Access Pass membership, you'll have access to these videos continuously. You'll be able to watch all of them at your leisure. So please consider to sign up and become a member of the channel. And without further ado, as always, why swim against the current when you can ride the wave? Don't play the victim, play the game.
What if I told you that China is likely to be the world's largest economy by 2035? Yes, you heard it right. This isn't a mere speculation, but a prediction backed by a report from an international think tank. The think tank, a collaboration of scholars from 5 countries, the United States, Russia, Canada, India, and China, suggests a fascinating shift in the global economic power balance. China's GDP is on track to surpass that of the United States, crowning the country as the world's largest economy around 2035. It's a remarkable projection, one that indicates China's promising growth can carry the world economy forward. But how is this feat possible, you may ask? The answer lies in the concept of sustained and cumulative compounding interest, a principle often associated with finance and growth. Like an acorn growing into a towering oak, China's economy is expected to flourish under the gradual realization of high-quality development and the cultivation of new quality productive forces. This ambitious projection, part of 10 visions for China in 2035, was released during an international symposium. The report suggests that if China maintains an annual GDP growth of about 5% in the next few years, and at least 4% until 2035, it will overtake the United States as the world's top economy with a high probability. Interestingly, the vision is rooted in China's faster economic growth than the US, the continuous appreciation of the yuan, its increased internationalization, and the long-term bullish outlook for the yuan against the US dollar. The report also highlights the role of developing countries as the core engine of global economic growth, with their high growth rates potentially doubling global GDP in the next decade. A future where the dragon rises to the top. Quite an intriguing prospect, wouldn't you agree? A vision for 2035, you ask? Let me share it with you. Picture a world where China sits at the helm of the global economy, having surpassed the United States to claim the title of the world's largest economy. And this is not just a wild guess. It is an ambitious projection from a joint research report by a distinguished think tank team from 5 countries: the United States, Russia, Canada, India, and China. This vision is rooted in the belief in China's potential for sustained and steady growth momentum. The country has been consistently meeting and exceeding its annual GDP growth targets, and if it maintains this trajectory, it will likely continue to do so. The year 2024 is especially noteworthy, with China setting a growth target of around 5% for its economy, a figure that has surpassed the expectations of many international institutions. So, the 2035 vision is not merely a dream, but a potential reality. It's a reality that is grounded in solid economic principles and backed by a steadfast commitment to long-term growth. As we look towards the future, it's a vision that paints a compelling picture of what the global economic landscape could look like in just over a decade. A shift of power is on the horizon, and it's not just about China. The global economy is poised for a dramatic transformation. As per a report from a multinational think tank, developing countries are expected to become the driving force of global economic growth. In fact, their robust growth rates could potentially double global GDP in the next decade. China, the rising economic titan, provides a compelling example of this power shift. The country's economic performance in 2023 was nothing short of impressive. It achieved a year-on-year growth of 5.2%, outperforming its official target of about 5%. This accomplishment, in the face of numerous challenges, was heralded as a hard-won victory. Moving forward, China has set its sights even higher. For 2024, the country has established a growth target of about 5% for its economy. This ambitious goal has exceeded the expectations of several international institutions. The confidence emanates from China's investment efficiency, which outpaces that of the United States. If China invests about 40% of its GDP, it's projected that the country's GDP growth will hit the 5% mark. But let's not forget, this is not just about China. This shift of power underscores the emerging significance of developing countries in the global economic landscape. They are no longer mere spectators but active contributors to global growth. Their high growth rates, if sustained, could bring about a doubling of the global GDP in the next decade. This transformation is not without its challenges, but these countries have shown resilience and adaptability in the face of adversity. The tools to navigate these challenges are within their reach, and their potential for growth is immense. The global economic landscape is changing, and developing countries are at the helm. The shifting tides of economic power are carving a new path for prosperity, and the world is keenly watching this fascinating evolution unfold. Efficiency and challenges, two sides of the same coin, wouldn't you say? Let's delve into China's economic prowess, particularly its efficient investment strategy. It's an interesting point raised by John Ross, a senior fellow at the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies. He asserts that China's investment is much more efficient than that of the United States. To put it in perspective, if China invests about 40% of its GDP, it's predicted that the country's GDP growth will hit 5%. This is a rate that would significantly outpace both the US and the European Union, based on last year's data. Therefore, China continues to be the main driver of world economic growth, as it has been for the past 4 decades. Now let's flip the coin and look at the challenges. It's not all smooth sailing ahead. Marco Fernandez, a Beijing-based Brazilian researcher, points out that the Chinese economy will have to face hurdles. These include overcapacity and a shift from an economic model that's more dependent on infrastructure and real estate to one that's more reliant on high technology. These challenges aren't trivial. Overcapacity can lead to wasteful investment and a potential economic slowdown, while a shift in the economic model requires significant changes in skills, industries, and infrastructure. However, Fernandez seems optimistic, suggesting that despite the challenges, China has many tools at its disposal to deal with them, more so than the West. It's a delicate balancing act, isn't it? On one hand, we have an efficient investment strategy that is propelling China towards becoming the world's largest economy. On the other hand, we have significant challenges that could potentially slow this growth. But as the saying goes, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. And it seems China is well poised to seize these opportunities. Challenges are part of the journey, but it seems China has the tools to overcome them. What are these tools that China possesses, one might wonder? Well, let's delve into the toolbox and examine the instruments that have positioned China on its trajectory towards becoming the world's largest economy. Firstly, there's China's efficiency in investment. As noted by John Ross, senior fellow at the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies, China's investment is significantly more efficient than that of the United States. If China invests about 40% of its GDP, it's projected that China's GDP growth will reach 5%. This means that China's economic growth rate will largely exceed that of the US and the European Union based on last year's data. Secondly, China has demonstrated remarkable adaptability and resilience in the face of economic challenges. The country's economy has had to navigate the shifting sands of overcapacity and a transition from an infrastructure and real estate-based model to one that's more focused on high technology. Despite these challenges, China has consistently exceeded its growth targets, a testament to its economic strength and agility. Lastly, China's economic growth isn't just about numbers, it's about the quality of growth. The country is consciously cultivating and developing new quality productive forces, focusing on high-quality development. This approach is akin to the compounding interest that slowly but surely builds up over time, leading to substantial growth in the long run. Marco Fernandez, a Beijing-based Brazilian researcher at the Tri-Continental Institute for Social Research, suggested that China has many tools to deal with economic challenges, much more than the West has. This, coupled with China's continuous appreciation of the yuan and its increased internationalization, gives the country a strong footing in its quest to become the world's top economy. So, there you have it. China's toolbox for economic success is equipped with efficient investment, resilience, and a focus on high-quality development. These are not just tools, but strategic assets that have propelled the country's staggering economic growth. And so, the dragon prepares to take flight, equipped with the tools for success. Introducing Vision Global News Network's Access Pass, your exclusive gateway to in-depth analysis you won't find anywhere else. Access Pass isn't just about watching the news, it's about joining a community. Engage with exclusive member-only forums, get recognized for your insights, and influence the conversation. Go beyond the headlines. Member-only live streams with award-winning journalists and economists answer your burning questions in real time. Access Pass membership unlocks exclusive benefits, discounts on merchandise, invitations to special events, and much more. Empower yourself with knowledge. Navigate the complexities of the world with confidence. Vision Global News Network's Access Pass, the key to a deeper understanding. Join the Access Pass community. The world is waiting. Are you ready?